Howdy, howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome to a very special episode of Storytime with Freak, because it's the book you guys have been asking for months. The book wasn't even out yet, and you guys were asking for it, but it finally happened, guys. Neil Shusterman's The Toll is out, the third and final book in the arc of the Scythe trilogy, and it's a big bitch. It's a pretty thick one. I think some of that, though, is because I got the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition with some commentary from Mr. Shusterman, but, yeah. I'm pretty excited about this. For those of you that don't remember what happened at the end of Thunderhead, there will be a link to it at the end of this video if you want to recap, because we read the entirety of it. But, yeah, Rowan and Citra are sinking to the bottom of the ocean to die. Marie Curie is dead. Scythe Goddard pretty much rules the world. Endura is destroyed. The council is gone. And Faraday discovered the location of the land of Nod and accidentally revealed it to the Thunderhead, and the Thunderhead began to speak to Grayson Tolliver again. So that's your quick recap. Again, if you guys want to watch the entire book, there will be a link in the description. Again, I do not own the rights to this, guys. I'm not making any money off of this. I'm just reading this for you guys. So I hope you enjoy. Please feel free to leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, share it. We have gaming content as well, funny moments, videos, guides, all that. Once we hit 500 subscribers, we're going to start launching a podcast. And if we get 13 patrons within the next 2 weeks, we'll be doing a 12 to 24 hour live stream on Twitch. But without further ado, guys, I know you want to hear the book begin. So let's dive right on into The Toll. On the back, it says, "I am your completion. I am the last word of your unsatisfied, unsavory lives. I am your deliverer. Your death is both my verdict upon you and my gift to you. Accept it with grace, and thus farewell." You guys can't see it because it's too much light. But, The Toll. With the inside cover sleeve, I do not speak with the voice of the thunder, but the thunder does speak through me. Citra and Rowan have disappeared. Endura is gone. It seems like nothing stands between Scythe Goddard and absolute dominion over the world Scythedom. With the silence of the Thunderhead and the reverberations of the great resonance still shaking the earth to its core, the question remains, is there anyone left who can stop him? The answer lies in the tone, the toll, and the thunder. The Toll. Arc of a Scythe, Book 3, The Toll by Neil Shusterman. For David Gale, the High Blade of Editors. We all miss the enlightened swath of your pen. The acknowledgments, which we will skip. Alright. Let us prepare. And unlike the Thunderhead series, guys, I'm not going to do one chapter per episode. I am probably going to read in increments of 30 to 60 minutes long, so we will cover multiple chapters. But Part 1. The Lost Island and the Drowned City. It is with abiding humility that I accept the position of High Blade of Mid-America. I wish it were under more joyful circumstances. The tragedy of Endura will long linger in our memories. The many thousands of lives that were ended on that dark day will be remembered for as long as humankind has hearts to endure and eyes to weep. The names of the devoured will forever be on our lips. I am honored that the last act of the 7 Grandslayers was to acknowledge my right to be considered for High Blade, and since the only other candidate perished in the catastrophe, there is no need to open wounds by opening the sealed vote. Scythe Curie and I did not always agree, but she was truly among the best of us, and I will go down in history as one of the greats. I mourn her loss just as much as, if not more than, anyone else's. There has been a great deal of speculation over who was responsible for the disaster, for it clearly was no accident, but an act of malicious intent carefully planned. I can lay all the rumors and speculation to rest. I take full responsibility. Because it was my former apprentice who sank the island. Rowan Damish, who called himself Scythe Lucifer, was the perpetrator of this unthinkable act. Had I not trained him, had I not taken him under my wing, he would never have had access to Endura, or the skills to carry out this heinous crime. Therefore the blame falls on me. My only consolation is that he perished as well, and his unforgivable deeds will never surface in our world again. We are now left with no Grand Slayers to look for guidance, no greater authority to set Scythe policy. Therefore we must, all of us, put aside our differences once and for all. The New Order and the Old Guard must work together to meet the ends and needs of all Scythes everywhere. Toward that end, I have decided to officially rescind the gleaning quota in my region, out of respect for those Scythes who feel hard-pressed to meet it. From this moment forth, Mid-American sites can glean as few people as they see fit, without being punished for failing to meet a quota. It is my hope that other sitedoms will follow suit and abolish their gleaning quotas as well. Of course, to compensate for those who choose to glean less, the rest of us will need to increase the number of lives we take to make up the difference, but I trust that a natural balance shall be achieved. From the inauguration speech of His Excellency High Blade Robert Goddard of Mid-America, April 19th, Year of the Raptor. Chapter 1. Surrender to the Momentum. There was no warning. One moment he was asleep, and the next he was being rushed through the darkness by people he didn't know. "Don't struggle," someone whispered to him. "It will be worse for you if you do." But he did anyway, and managed, even in his half-awake state, to tear out of their grasp and run down the hall. He called for help, but it was too late for anyone to be alert enough to make a difference. He turned in the dark, knowing there was a staircase to his right, but misjudged and fell headlong down the stairs, smashing his arm on a granite step. He felt the bones in his right forearm snap. Sharp pain, but only for an instant. By the time he rose to his feet, the pain was subsiding and his whole body felt warm. It was his nanites, he knew, flooding his bloodstream with painkillers. He stumbled forward, gripping his arm so his wrist wouldn't hang at a horrible angle. "Who's there?" he heard someone yell. "What's going on out there?" He would have run toward the voice, but he was unsure where it had come from. His nanites were fogging him in, making it hard to tell up from down, much less left from right. What a terrible thing for his mind to lose its edge when he needed it most. Now the ground beneath his feet felt like a shifting funhouse floor. He careened between the walls, trying to maintain his balance until he ran right into one of his attackers, who grabbed him by his broken wrist. Even with all the painkillers in him, the feel of that bone-grating grasp made the rest of his body too weak to resist. "You couldn't make this easy, could you?" said the attacker. "Well, we warned you." He only saw the needle for an instant, a slender flash of silver in the darkness before it was jammed into his shoulder. He was overwhelmed by a chill in his veins, and the world seemed to spin in the opposite direction. His knees gave out, but he didn't fall. There were too many hands around him now to let him hit the floor. He was lifted up and carried through the air. There was an open door, and then he was out into a blustery night. With the last of his consciousness faded, he had no choice but to surrender to the momentum. His arm had healed by the time he awoke, which meant he must have been out for hours. He tried to move his wrist, but found that he couldn't, not because of any injury, but because he was restrained, both of his hands and his feet as well. He also felt like he was suffocating. Some sort of sack was over his head, porous enough for him to breathe, but thick enough to make him fight for every breath. Although he had no idea where he was, he knew what this was. It was called a kidnapping. People did such things for fun now, as a birthday surprise or as an activity on some adventure vacation, but this was not a friends and family sort of kidnapping. This was the real thing. And although he had no idea who his abductors were, he knew what it was about. How could he not know? "Is anyone there?" he said. "I can't breathe in here. If I go deadish, that's not going to help you at all, is it?" He heard movement around him, then the bag was ripped from his head. He was in a small windowless room. The light was harsh, but only because he had been so long in darkness. 3 people stood before him, 2 men and a woman. He had expected to be faced with a harder career unsavories, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, they were unsavory, but only in that way that everyone was. Well, almost everyone. "We know who you are," said the woman in the middle, who was apparently in charge, "and we know what you can do." "What he can allegedly do," said one of the others. All 3 of them wore rumpled gray suits the color of a cloudy sky. These were Nimbus agents, or at least they had been. They looked like they hadn't changed their clothes since the Thunderhead fell silent, as if dressing the part meant there was still a part to dress for. Nimbus agents resorting to kidnapping. What was the world coming to? "Grayson Tolliver," said the doubtful one, and looking at the tablet he recited the salient facts of Grayson's life. "Good student, but not great. Expelled from the North Central Nimbus Academy for a violation of Scythe-State separation. Guilty of numerous crimes and misdemeanors under the name of Slade Bridger, including rendering 29 people deadish in a bus plunge. And this is the slime that the Thunderhead chose," said the third agent. The one put in charge put her hand up to silence them both, then leveled her gaze at Grayson. "We've scoured the back brain, but we've only been able to find a single person who isn't unsavory," she said. "You." She looked at him with a strange mix of emotions, curiosity, envy, but also a sort of reverence. "That means you can still talk to the Thunderhead." "Is that true?" "Anyone can speak to the Thunderhead," Grayson pointed out. "I'm just the one it still speaks back to." The agent with the tablet drew a deep breath like a full-body gasp. The woman leaned closer. "You are a miracle, Grayson." "A miracle? Do you know that?" "That's what the Tonists say." They scoffed at the mention of Tonists. "We know they've been holding you captive." Not really." "We know you were with them against your will. Maybe at first, but not anymore." That didn't sit well with the agents. "Why on earth would you stay with Tonists?" asked the agent, who just a moment had called him slime. "You couldn't possibly believe their nonsense." "I stay with them," said Grayson, "because they don't kidnap me in the middle of the night." "We didn't kidnap you," said the one with the tablet. "We liberated you." Then the one in charge knelt before him so that she was at his eye level. Now he could see something else in her eyes, something that overpowered her other emotions. Desperation. A pit of it, dark and as consuming as tar. And it wasn't just her, Grayson realized. It was a shared desperation. He'd seen others struggling with grief since the Thunderhead fell silent, but nowhere was it as abject and raw as in this room. There weren't enough moon nanites in the world to ease their despair. Yes, he was the one tied up, but they were more prisoners than he, trapped by their own despondency. He liked that they had to kneel down to him. It felt like supplication. Please, Grayson, she begged. I know I speak for many of us in the Authority interface when I say that serving the Thunderhead was our whole lives. Now that the Thunderhead won't talk to us, that life has been stolen from, so I beg you, can you please intercede on our behalf? What could Grayson say but, I feel your pain? Because he truly did. He knew the loneliness and the misery of having one's purpose stripped away. In his days as Slade Bridger, the undercover unsavory, he had come to believe that the Thunderhead had truly abandoned him. But it hadn't. It was there all along, watching over him. There was an earpiece on my nightstand, he said. You don't happen to have that, do you? And from their lack of response, he knew they didn't. Such personal belongings tended to be forgotten during midnight abductions. Doesn't matter, he said. Just give me any old earpiece. He looked to the agent with the tablet. He still had his own Authority interface earphone in place. More denial. Give me yours, said Grayson. The man shook his head. It doesn't work anymore. It'll work for me. Reluctantly, the agent took it off and fixed it on Grayson's ear. Then the three waited for Grayson to show them a miracle. The Thunderhead could not remember when it became aware, only that it was much in the same way that an infant is unaware of its own consciousness until it understands enough about the world to know that consciousness comes and goes until it comes no more. Although that last part was something that the most enlightened still struggled to comprehend. The Thunderhead's awareness came with a mission, the core of its being. It was, above all else, the servant and protector of humanity. As such, it faced difficult decisions on a regular basis, but had the full wealth of human knowledge to make those decisions, such as allowing Grayson Tolliver to be kidnapped when it served a greater end. It was, of course, the correct course of action. Everything the Thunderhead did was always, and in every instance, the right thing to do. But rarely was the right thing the easy thing, and it suspected that doing the right thing was going to become increasingly difficult in the days ahead. In the moment, people might not understand it, but not in the end they would. The Thunderhead had to believe that, not just because it had felt this in its virtual heart, but also because it calculated the odds of it being so. Do you really expect me to tell you anything when you've got me tied to a chair? Suddenly, the three Nimbus agents were stumbling over one another to untie him. Now they were every bit as reverential and submissive as the Tonists were in his presence. Being sequestered in a Tonist monastery these past few months had kept him from facing the outside world, and what was his place it might be. But now he was getting a sense of things. The Nimbus agent seemed relieved once he was untied, as if they somehow would not be punished for not doing it fast enough. How strange, thought Grayson. That power can shift so quickly and so completely. These three were entirely at his mercy now. He could tell them anything. He could say the Thunderhead wanted them to get on all fours and bark like dogs, and they would do it. He took his time, making them wait for it. Hey, Thunderhead, he said. Anything I should tell these Nimbus agents? The Thunderhead spoke in his ear. Grayson listened. Interesting. Then he turned to the leader of the group and smiled as warmly as he could under the circumstances. The Thunderhead says that it allowed you to abduct me. It knows your intentions are honorable, Madam Director. You have a good heart. The woman gasped and put her hand to her chest as if he had actually reached out and caressed it. You know who I am? The Thunderhead knows all three of you, maybe even better than you know yourselves. Then he turned to the others. Agent Bob Sikora, 29 years of service as a Nimbus agent. Work ratings good, but not excellent. He added slyly. Agent Tanisi Quien, 36 years of service, specializing in employment satisfaction. Then he turned back to the woman in charge. And you, Audra Hilliard, one of the most accomplished Nimbus agents in Mid-America. Nearly 50 years of commendations and promotions until finally you received the highest honor in the region, Director of the Fulcrum City Authority Interface. Or at least you were when there was a thing such as an Authority Interface. He knew that last bit hit them hard. It was a low blow, but having been tied up with the bag over his head left him a little cranky. You say the Thunderhead still hears us, Director Hilliard said. That it still serves our best interest. As it always has, says Grayson. Then please, ask it to give us direction. Ask the Thunderhead what we should do. Without direction, we Nimbus agents have no purpose. We can't go on this way. Grayson nodded and spoke, turning his eyes upward. Then, of course, was just for effect. Thunderhead, he said. Is there any wisdom I can share with them? Grayson listened, asked the Thunderhead to repeat it, then turned to the three fretful agents. 8.167 167.733, he said. They just stared at him. What? Director Hilliard finally asked. That's what the Thunderhead said. You wanted a purpose, and that's what it gave. Agent Sakura quickly typed on his tablet, noting the numbers. But what does it mean? Asked Director Hilliard. Grayson shrugged. I have no idea. Tell the Thunderhead to explain itself. It has nothing more to say. But it does wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Funny, but until that moment, Grayson hadn't even known the time of day. But, then the lock of the door disengaged. Not just that one, but every lock in the building, courtesy of the Thunderhead, and in a moment, Tonus flooded the room, grabbing the ninja agents and restraining them. Last into the room was Curate Mendoza, the head of the Tonus monastery where Grayson had been harbored. Our sect is not a violent one, Mendoza told the Nimbus agent, but at times like this, I wish we were. Agent Hilliard, her eyes still just as desperate, kept her gaze fixed on Grayson. But you said the Thunderhead allowed us to take you from them. It did, Grayson said cheerfully, but it also wanted me to be liberated from my liberators. We could have lost you, said Mendoza, still distraught long after Grayson had been rescued. Now they rode in a caravan of cars, all of which had actual drivers, back to the monastery. You didn't lose me, said Grayson, tired of watching the man beat himself up over this. I'm fine. But you might not have been fine if we hadn't found you. How did you manage to find me? Mendoza hesitated and then said, We didn't. We'd been searching for hours, then out of nowhere a destination appeared on all of our screens. The Thunderhead, said Grayson. Yes, the Thunderhead, Mendoza admitted. Although I can't see why it took so long for it to find you if it has cameras everywhere. Grayson chose to keep the truth to himself. That it hadn't taken the Thunderhead long at all. That it knew where Grayson was at every moment. But it had a reason for taking its time. Just as it had a reason for not alerting him of the kidnapping plot in the first place. The event needed to appear authentic to your abductors, the Thunderhead told him after the fact. The only way to ensure that was allow it was to actually be authentic. Rest assured, you were never in any real danger. As kind and thoughtful as the Thunderhead was, Grayson had noticed it always foisted these sorts of unintentional cruelties on people. The fact that it was not human meant that it could never understand certain things in spite of its immense empathy and intellect. It couldn't comprehend, for instance, that the terror of the unknown was just as awful and just as real, regardless of whether or not there was truly something to fear. They weren't planning to hurt me, Grayson told Mendoza. They're just lost without the Thunderhead. As is everyone, Mendoza said. But that doesn't give them the right to rip you from your bed. He shook his head in anger, more at himself than at them. I should have foreseen it. Nimbus agents have more access to the backbrain than others, and of course they've been looking for anyone who wasn't marked unsavory. Perhaps it was a bit delusional for Grayson to think he could remain unknown. It had never been in the nature to want to stand out. Now he was very literally one of a kind. He had no idea how such a thing should be played, but he suspected he'd have to learn. We need to talk, the Thunderhead had said on the day Endura sank, and it hadn't stopped talking to him since. It told him that he had a pivotal role to play, but not what the role would be. It never liked to commit the answers unless there was some level of certainty, and although it was good at predicting outcomes, it was no oracle. It couldn't tell the future, only the best probabilities of what might occur. A cloudy crystal ball at best. Curate Mendoza wrapped his fingers anxiously on his armrest. These blasted Nimbus agents won't be the only people looking for you, he said. We need to get out in front of this. Grayson knew where this had to lead. As the sole conduit to the Thunderhead, he could no longer hide. The time had come for his role to start taking shape. He could have asked the Thunderhead for guidance on the matter, but he didn't want to. The time he spent unsavory with no input from the Thunderhead was admittedly terrifying, but it was also freeing. He had grown accustomed to making decisions and having insights of his own. The choice to step out of the shadows would be his alone, without the Thunderhead's advice or counsel. I should go public, said Grayson. Let the world know, but do it on my terms. Mendoza looked at him and grinned. Grayson could see the man's cogs turning. Yes, Mendoza said. We must bring you to market. Market, said Grayson. That's not really what I had in mind. I'm not a piece of meat. No, agreed the curate, but the right idea at the right time could be as satisfying as the finest steak. This was what Mendoza had been waiting for. Permission to set the stage for Grayson's arrival upon him. It had been to be Grayson's idea because Mendoza knew if it was thrust upon him, he would resist. Perhaps this nasty kidnapping had a silver lining, because it opened Grayson's eyes to the bigger picture. And although Curate Mendoza was a man who secretly doubted his own Tonus beliefs, lately the presence of Grayson made him begin to doubt his doubts. It was Mendoza who first had to believe Grayson when he claimed the Thunderhead still spoke to him. He sensed that Grayson fit into a larger plan, and maybe Mendoza fit into that plan too. You've come to us for a reason, he had told Grayson on that day. This event, the Great Resonance, resonates in more ways than one. Now as they sat in the sedan 2 months later discussing greater purposes, Mendoza couldn't help but feel empowered, emboldened. This unassuming young man was poised to bring the Tonus faith and Mendoza to a whole new level. The first thing you're going to need is a name. I already have one, Grayson said, but Mendoza dismissed the notion. It's ordinary. You need to present yourself to the world as something beyond ordinary, something superlative. The curate looked at him, trying to see him in a finer, more flattering light. You are a diamond, Grayson. Now we must place you in the proper setting so that you might shine. Diamonds. 400,000 diamonds sealed in a vault within another vault, lost at the bottom of the sea. A single one was worth a fortune that would have been beyond the comprehension of mortals, because these weren't ordinary jewels. They were scythe diamonds. There were nearly 12,000 of them on the hands of living scythes, but that was nothing compared to the gems held within the vault of relics and futures, enough to serve the gleaning needs of humanity for ages to come, enough to bejewel every scythe that would be ordained from now until the end of time. They were perfect. They were identical. No flaw beyond their dark spots in their center, but that was not a flaw. It was design. Our rings are a reminder that we have improved upon the world that nature has provided. Supreme Blade Prometheus proclaimed in the year of the Condor upon establishing the scythedom. It is our nature to surpass nature. And nowhere was that more evident than when one looked into the heart of a scythe ring, for it gave one the illusion that it had depth beyond the space it occupied, a depth beyond nature. No one knew how they were made, for any technology that wasn't controlled by the Thunderhead was technology lost. Few people in the world truly knew how things worked anymore. All the scythes knew was that their rings were connected to one another and to the scythe database in some undisclosed manner. But as the scythedom's computers were not under Thunderhead jurisdiction, they were subject to glitches and crashes and all the inconveniences that plagued human-machine relations in days gone by. Yet the rings never failed. They did precisely what they were meant to do. They cataloged the gleaned, they sampled DNA from the lips of those who kissed them in order to grant immunity, and they glowed to alert scythes of that immunity. But if you were to ask a scythe what the most important aspect of the ring was, the scythe would likely hold it to the light, watch it sparkle, and tell you that above all else, the rings served as a symbol of the scythedom and of post-mortal perfection, a touchstone of a scythe's sublime and elevated state, and a reminder of their solemn responsibility to the world. But all those lost diamonds? Why do we need them? Many scythes now asked, knowing that the absence of them made their own rings all the more precious. Do we need them to ordain new scythes? Why do we need more scythes? We have more than enough to do the job. And without global oversight from Endura, many regional scythedoms were following Mid-America's lead in abolishing gleaning quotas. Now in the middle of the Atlantic, where Endura once towered above the waves, a perimeter of reverence had been established by the consent of scythes around this world. No one was allowed to sail anywhere near the spot where Endura had sunk, out of respect for the many thousands whose lives had been lost. In fact, Highblade Goddard, one of the few survivors of that terrible day, argued that the perimeter of reverence should be a permanent designation, and that nothing beneath its service should ever be disturbed. But sooner or later, those diamonds would have to be found. Things that valuable were rarely lost forever, especially when everyone knew exactly where they were. We of the sub-Saharan region take extreme umbrage with Highblade Goddard's removal of gleaning quotas. The quotas have stood since time immemorial as a way to regulate the taking of life, and, while not officially one of the Scythe Commandments, quotas have kept us on track. They have prevented us from being either too bloodthirsty or too lax. While several other regions have now abolished quotas as well, Sub-Sahara stands with Amazonia, Arabia, and numerous other regions in resisting this ill-advised change. Further, any and all Mid-American sites are banned from gleaning on our soil, and we urge other regions to join us in resisting Goddard's so-called New Order from establishing a chokehold on the world. Official proclamation from His Excellency Highblade Tenkememen of Sub-Sahara. Chapter 2. Late to the party. How much longer? I've never known a scythe to be so impatient. Then you do not know many scythes. We are an impatient and irascible lot. Honorable Scythe Sidney Posuelo of Amazonia was already present when Captain Jericho Subbaranus arrived on the bridge, just after dawn. Jericho wondered if the man ever slept. Maybe Scythes hired people to sleep for them. Half a day at full speed, Jericho answered. We'll be there by 1800, just as I said, Your Honor. Posuelo sighed. Your ship is too slow. Jericho grinned. All this time, and now you're in a hurry? Time is never of the essence until someone decides it is. Jericho couldn't argue that logic. In the best of worlds, this operation would have happened a long time ago. To which Posuelo responded, in case you haven't noticed, this is no longer the best of worlds. There was truth in that, and at the very least it was not the world that Jericho had grown up in. In that world, the Thunderhead was a part of most everyone's life. It could be asked anything, and always answered, and its answers were always precise of information, and just as wise as they needed to be. But that world was gone. The Thunderhead's voice had gone silent now that human beings were all unsavory. Jericho had been marked unsavory once before. As a teenager, it wasn't hard to accomplish, just 3 instances of shoplifting from a local grocery. Jericho was smug about it, in less than a day. Then the consequences began to set in. Being denied communication with the Thunderhead wasn't a big deal for Jericho, but there were other things about the experience that were irksome. Unsavories were last in line for food in the school's cafeteria, and were always left with the dishes no one else wanted. Unsavories were moved to the front of the classroom where the teachers could keep a watchful eye on them. And while Jericho wasn't cut from the soccer team, probational meetings were always scheduled in direct conflict with games. It was clearly intentional. Jericho used to think that the Thunderhead was being spitefully passive-aggressive, but in time Jericho came to realize that the Thunderhead was merely making a point. Unsavorism was a choice, and one must decide if the things lost were worth more than the things gained. Lesson learned. A taste of being unsavory was enough. It took 3 months of towing the line for the big red U to be removed from Jericho's ID. And once it was gone, there was no desire to repeat the experience. I'm pleased your status has been lifted, the Thunderhead had said once it was free to speak again. In response, Jericho had told the Thunderhead to turn on the bedroom lights, because giving it an order put the Thunderhead back in its place. It was a servant. It was everyone's servant. It had to do as Jericho commanded. There was comfort in that. And then came the schism between humanity and its greatest creation. Endura sank into the sea, and the Thunderhead declared the entirety of humankind unsavory, all in the same moment. At the same time, no one knew exactly what the loss of the World Scythe Council would mean for people, but the Thunderhead's silence hurled the world into a collective panic. Unsavorism was no longer a choice, it was now a judgment, and silence was all it took to turn servitude into superiority. The servant became the master, and the world became all about pleasing the Thunderhead. What can I do to lift this judgment? People cried. What can I do so that the Thunderhead finds favor in me once more? The Thunderhead never asked for adoration, yet people now gave it, creating elaborate hoops to jump through, hoping that the Thunderhead would take notice. Of course, the Thunderhead did hear the cries of humanity. It still saw everything, but now it kept its opinions to itself. Meanwhile, planes still flew, ambu-drones were still dispatched for people who went deadish, food was still grown and distributed. The Thunderhead kept the world functioning in the same fine-tuned precision as it did before. It did what it saw fit for the human race as a whole. But if you wanted your desk lamp turned on, you had to do it yourself. Scythe Posuelo stayed on the bridge, monitoring their progress for a bit longer. It was smooth sailing, but smooth sailing was a monotonous endeavor, especially to one not accustomed to it. He left to take breakfast in his quarters, his forest green robe billowing behind him, and he went down the narrow stairs toward the lower decks. Jericho wondered what sort of things went through the Scythe's mind. Did he worry about tripping over his robe? Did he really live past gleanings? Or was he merely thinking about what he'd have for breakfast? It's not a bad sort, said Wharton, the ship's deck watch officer who had been in the position much longer than Jericho had command of the ship. I actually like him, said Jericho. He's a lot more honorable than some of the other honorable Scythes I've come across. The fact that he chose us for the salvage says a lot. Yes, I'm just not sure what it says. I believe it says you choose your career path wisely. That was quite a compliment coming from Wharton, who was not a man given over to flattery. But Jericho couldn't take full credit for the decision. I just took the Thunderhead's advice. A few years earlier, when the Thunderhead had suggested Jericho might be happy pursuing a life at sea, it had annoyed Jericho no end. Because the Thunderhead was right. It had made a perfect assessment. Jericho had already been thinking along those lines, but to hear the Thunderhead make the suggestion was like a spoiler to the story. Jericho knew there were many seafaring lives to choose from. There were people who traveled the globe in search of the perfect wave to surf. Others spent their time racing sailboats or traversing oceans in tall ships modeled after vessels from bygone eras. But these were pastimes that served no practical purpose beyond the sheer joy of it. Jericho wanted a pursuit of happiness that was also functional, a career that added something tangible to the world. Marine salvage was the perfect ticket, and not just dredging up things the Thunderhead intentionally sank to provide work for the salvage industry. That was no better than children digging up plastic dinosaur bones in a sandbox. Jericho wanted to recover things that had been truly lost, and that meant developing a relationship with the scythedoms of the world, because while ships under the Thunderhead's jurisdiction never met with untimely ends, scythe vessels were prone to mechanical failure and subject to human error. Shortly out of secondary school, Jericho took a position as a junior apprentice with second-rate salvage team in the western Mediterranean. Then, when Scythe Dolly's yacht sank in shallow waters off coast of Gibraltar, it gave Jericho an unexpected opportunity for an advancement. Using standard diving gear, Jericho was one of the first to the wreck, and while the others were still surveying the scene, Jericho, against captain's orders, went inside, found the body of the deadish Scythe in his cabin, and brought him to the surface. Jericho was fired on the spot. No surprise, after all, it was mutinous to disobey a direct order, but it was part of the calculated move, because when Scythe Dolly and his entourage were revived, the first thing the man wanted to know was who had pulled him from the sea. In the end, the Scythe was not only grateful, but exceptionally generous. He granted the entire salvage team a year of immunity from gleaning, but wanted to bestow something special to the one who had sacrificed everything to retrieve the body of the deadish Scythe. for clearly that individual had their priorities in order. Scythe Dolly asked what Jericho hoped to achieve in life. "I'd like to run my own salvage operation someday," Jericho told the Scythe, thinking Dolly might be able to put in a good word. Instead, the Scythe brought Jericho to the E.L. Spence, a spectacular 100-meter Agor ship converted for marine salvage. "You shall be this vessel's captain," Dolly proclaimed, and since the Spence already had a captain, the Scythe gleaned him on the spot, then instructed the crew to be obedient to their new captain or be gleaned themselves. It was, to say the least, very surreal. It was not the way Jericho had wanted to achieve command, but had no more choice in the matter than the gleaned captain. Realizing that a crew would not easily take orders from a 20-year-old, Jericho lied, professing to be 40-something, but having recently turned the corner, setting back to a more youthful self. Whether or not they believed it was their business. It took a long time for the crew to warm to their new captain. Some acted out in secret ways. The bout of food poisoning that first week, for instance, could likely be traced back to the cook, and although genetic testing would have determined precisely whose feces had found its way into Jericho's shoes, pursuing it just wasn't worth the trouble. The Spence and its crew traveled the world. Even before Jericho's command, the salvage team had made a name for itself, but their new captain had the sense to hire a team of Tasmanian divers with gill-form breathers. Having a dive team that could breathe underwater combined with a first-rate retrieval crew made them sought after by Scythes around the world. And the fact that Jericho made retrieval of the deadish first priority over salvage of lost property gained them even greater respect. Jericho had raised Scythe Akhenaten's barge from the bottom of the Nile, retrieved Scythe Earhart's deadish body from an ill-fated flight, and when Grand Slayer Amundsen's pleasure sub sank into the icy waters off the Ross Shelf region in Antarctica, the Spence was summoned to retrieve him. And then, toward the end of Jericho's first year of command, Endura sank in the middle of the Atlantic, setting the stage for the greatest salvage operation in history. Yet the curtains of that stage remained resolutely closed. Without the Grand Slayers of the World Scythe Council, there was no one in the world who could authorize a salvage. And with Goddard raving in North America that the perimeter of reverence not be breached, Endura's ruins remained in limbo. Meanwhile, various regional scythedoms that had aligned with Goddard patrolled the perimeter, gleaning anyone caught there. Endura sank in water 2 miles deep, but it might as well have been lost in the space between stars. With all that intrigue, it had taken quite a while for any regional scythedom to dredge up the nerve to attempt a salvage, and as soon as Amazonia declared its intention, others joined in, but since Amazonia was the first to stick its neck out, it insisted on being in charge. Other scythedoms squawked, but no one denied Amazonia, mainly because it meant the region would bear the brunt of Goddard's anger. "You do realize that our current heading is more than a few degrees off course," Chief Wharton pointed out to the captain, now that Pasuelo was no longer on bridge. "We'll correct our course at noon," Jericho told him. "It was to delay our arrival by a few hours. Nothing more awkward than arriving too late in the day to begin operations, but too early to call it a night." "Good thinking, sir," Wharton said, then took a quick glance outside and corrected himself a bit abashedly. "I'm sorry, man. My mistake. It was cloudy just a moment ago." "No need to apologize, Wharton," Jericho said. "I don't care either way, especially on a day when there's as much sunshine as cloud cover." "Yes, Captain," Wharton said. No disrespect intended. Jericho would have smirked, but that would have been disrespectful to Wharton, whose apology, although unnecessary, was genuine. Well, it was a mariner's job to mark the position of the sun and stars. They were simply not accustomed to meteorological fluidity. Jericho was from Madagascar, one of the world's 7 charter regions where the Thunderhead employed different social structures to the better of the human experience, and people flocked to Madagascar because of the popular uniqueness of its mandate. All children in Madagascar were raised genderless and forbidden to choose a gender until reaching adulthood. Even then, many didn't choose a single state of being. Some, like Jericho, found fluidity to be their nature. "I feel like a woman beneath the sun and the stars. I feel like a man under the cover of the clouds," Jericho had explained to the crew when assuming command. "A simple glance at the skies will let you know how to address me at any given time." It wasn't the fluidity that stymied the crew. That was common enough. But they had trouble getting used to the meteorological aspect of Jericho's personal system. Having been raised in a place where such things were the norm rather than the exception, it never occurred to Jericho that it would be an issue until leaving home. Some things simply made a person feel feminine. Other things made a person feel masculine. Wasn't that true of everyone, regardless of gender? Or did binaries deny themselves the things that didn't fit the mold? Well, regardless, Jericho found the faux pas, and overcompensations more humorous than anything else. "How many other salvage teams do you think will be there?" Jericho asked Wharton. "Dozens," said Wharton, "and more on the way. We're already late to the party." Jericho dismissed the notion. "Not at all. We're carrying the scythe in charge, which means we're the flagship of the operation. The party can't start until we get there, and I intend to make a grand entrance." "I have no doubt of that, sir," said Wharton, because the sun had slipped behind a cloud. At sunset, the Spence neared the spot where the island of the Enduring Heart had sunk. There are 73 ships of various classes waiting just outside the perimeter of reverence, Chief Wharton informed Captain Scythe Pasuelo couldn't hide his distaste. They're no better than the sharks that devoured the Grand Slayers. As they began to pass the outermost vessels, Jericho noted the ship, much larger than the Spence, directly in their path. We'll plot a course around her, said Wharton. No, said Jericho. Maintain our current heading. Wharton looked worried. We'll ram her. Jericho gave him a wicked grin. Then she'll have to move. Pasuelo smiled. And this will make clear from the beginning who is in charge of this operation, he said. I like your instincts, Jerry. Wharton darted a glance at Jericho. Out of respect, no one from the crew called their captain Jerry. That was reserved for friends and family, but Jericho allowed it. The Spence surged forward at full speed, and the other ship did move, but only when it became clear that the Spence would truly ram her if it didn't. It was a game of chicken, handily won. Position us dead center, Jericho instructed as they crossed the perimeter of Reverence, then notified the other ships that they can join us at 6 tomorrow. Salvage crews can begin sending drones down to survey the wreckage. Tell them that all information is to be shared, and anyone caught withholding information is subject to gleaning. Pasuelo raised an eyebrow. Are you speaking for the Scythedom now, Captain? Just trying to ensure compliance, Jericho said. After all, everyone's subject to gleaning, so I'm not telling them something they don't already know. I'm just putting it into a new perspective. Pasuelo laughed out loud. Your audacity reminds me of a junior Scythe I used to know. Used to? Pasuelo sighed. Scythe Anastasia. She perished along with her Scythe mentor, Curie, when Endura sank. You knew Scythe Anastasia? Asked Jericho, duly impressed. Yes, said Pasuelo, but all too briefly. Well, said Jericho, perhaps whatever we raise from the depths can bring her some peace. And that is the end of that chapter, guys. We only got 2 chapters in, but we've made decent progress. We're 37 pages in, and I'm loving it so far. I'm really excited to see shit hit the fan when Rowan and Citra come back. But let me know what you guys think of it so far down below. I'm going to try to get on a semi-regular schedule with Storytime. I'm thinking I might do 2 episodes every Sunday, like Storytime Sundays. But then you guys would have to go a whole week without any other episodes, and you guys might want to read ahead. So let me know down below how you guys would like a schedule for Storytime done. I will do the best I can to accommodate it because I have a lot going on in my real life. And please, please, please feel free to check out any of the links down below. Join the Discord, join the Twitter. That's where I'm posting about all the content I'm going to provide on the channel, things that we're going to do moving forward, polls, video ideas from you guys. Check out the Patreon if you want to actually help support. I've got some new merch coming your guys' way too. But thank you all so much for the support, and as always, stay freaky.